Hello, everyone. The title of today's episode is titled The Purpose of All Hidden Dimensions. So, purpose of all hidden dimensions. To catch you up to how I see it, on a huge rock, to us it's huge, but let's say on a tiny rock in the middle of nowhere, of empty space, creatures on the surface of this pebble grew to a point. Evolution is like another word for growth, I think. People don't consider that. The creatures grew and evolved to a point where they separated themselves from the world. So that means we suddenly created an identification that was in a world where we were individuals in a world. We were people. We suddenly became people out of just like silent creatures roaming the surface of this planet. Once that self-awareness was developed, that means pretty much this creature's either looked in a still pond or something and suddenly realized it is objectively separate from the world. One can say the hands, the body, the ability to move on the surface of a planet does create the sense of separation. Do you see? So a dwelling creature had to at some point have the seed of memory planted in it. So what that means is, due to an ability for this creature to be aware, there was a self-awareness, and this self-awareness was the origin of the subjective evolution. The subjective evolution was a point of self-consideration beyond matter. Do you see? That means suddenly we had thoughts, and I heard something so hilarious. I read it. I don't think I read it. I think it was something on YouTube I saw, but pretty much like this was the idea that the first human beings, they would just get a thought, like let's say they get a thought they never had, and then they think that voice was a god or something. Do you see? So the history of the meaning of life is based on the history of the relationship of this creature with a subtler sense of mind. So what I'm telling you is that there was a big, let's say there was a physical big bang. Let's entertain the scientific position for a second. Let's say there was a big bang, bang, the physical matter started. Do you see? And then I am saying there was a big bang in a subjective realm, in an abstract universe, originated out of nowhere. It originated the moment there was self-awareness and enough of a sophisticated memory and imagination. Do you see? Like these, it's like the moment we had a thought of ourselves in our mind was the moment the realm of imagination was accessible. So we became a thought. We evolved into a thought while simultaneously handling our bodies. This thought was, in some sense, no, I don't want to say let's say catalyzed. Let's say language is a catalyst for the evolution of consciousness or something. But what I'm telling you is that suddenly human beings, due to their need, due to this attention, how can I say it? When a sense of self for the first time was established for this creature roaming this earth, where imagination's standing in, it's too easy to call this life an illusion. And it is too easy to call this life that this is its only matter. These are the easy ways out. It is only when chaos and order clash at their most advanced. Shit. Oh, never mind. I thought I didn't click the streaming button. Let me just double check if this streaming thing is going on the page. Yeah, it's going on. To continue, the world is a place where duality can experience the other side. Okay. My attention has relocated, so I gotta start from a new point. New checkpoint for this talk, but let's begin like this. What I'm trying to say is that after there was enough of an objective evolution, the objective evolution is a term that I named. Because there was like not the objective evolution, sorry, the subjective evolution. It was as if it was missing in among the branches of knowledge. So for me, I realized that it's like we have two eyes that see the same, so we're in two dimensions that is actually one moment of being. These two dimensions is the subjective realm and the objective realm. These are words I use. These are words that my mind originated for these concepts. You see, those who respect me will abide by them. Those who don't, it's fine. Go your way. What I'm trying to tell you is that the objective evolution experienced a stasis. In doing so, through self awareness igniting, the subjective realm evolved to such a complex point where we have to take care of our bodies when our desires, our subjective desires, are a bit careless. Like, for example, you could say how society is dealing with drugs. Drugs include anything, any substance that requires you take it again. You know, in some sense, that's what it means. So one can say we're addicted to water. But I'm telling you, it's like addiction is just a word. In actuality, a direct experience cannot be termed, but we use terms to try to somehow be able to communicate the same imagery to one another. For me, the subjective evolution has gone to a point now where it will require the objective evolution to no longer be the master. So, as if like your imagination seems to be a servant to your physical body, right? But you don't realize your name and your personality and all these words, they're in your mind in some sense. They're not tangible. They're just, if your attention's on it in your abstract universe, it happens in the subjective realm. So these two eyes that see the same is pretty much the subjective self and the objective self being one moment, and there is a witness of them both. In ancient mystical traditions, this was known as I don't want to say dilemma, but for some people it was a dilemma. But let me tell you, it's like the observer and the observed dynamic. This dynamic is very crucial for any human creature to comprehend itself because there is something that's being observed. For example, I'm observing my physical hands, I'm observing this computer, I'm observing this Gatorade bottle here, I'm observing this mouse, this lighter. So what I'm telling you is I'm observing something. This is what I consider the observed. So matter is what is being observed. But what is it being observed? Why? And this was in some sense how the inspiration for the name Mr. Within came about. Because I realized what is observing is not defined by what is observed. What does that mean? That means you have gone through different birthdays, blown different candles on different cakes, and each year you blow a candle cake, a part of you is like, oh, it's still the same me, but I've grown. So do you see how interesting it is that we're giving objective reality the loudest, the biggest hammer of judgment, but our physical nature is changing all the time. But there is something within the being that is witnessing all these changes occur in the waking state, and in some sense making the conclusion that the real you is not just your body growing, because there's something that has access to the memories of different ages you've lived in. So for me, I was like, what is this? What is this human life? Like, not in a bad way or any context. I was like an explorer in my youth. This is the greatest trait that can be evolved in the human being, that we all become authentic explorers of realms that we truly, like a part of, we are called towards. you know you know the beautiful thing about the wars of the mind is that men and women are, their abilities are judged based on their consciousness, not based on their strength. Like, oh my god, like if a time traveler from the future was going to come back and to this level of violence. This is why I see, I don't think anybody, like, when we'll have time travelers on this planet, when they actually want to come here. Do you know what I mean? That means we're living in a savageness that is like the savageness of the caveman to 10,000 years ahead of our time. So what I'm trying to say is that it's like a non-stop kind of golden ratio wave or sine wave, something like this, where it's as if attention, this witness within, which is an unspeakable attention, it transcends the language threshold, so we cannot describe it in a dualistic kind of technology, which language is. And so, in some sense, what occurs is that there comes the death or the stopping point of you as a living being on this planet thinking you're a thought. The moment you realize you're not your thoughts, suddenly you will see the value of philosophy was keeping the most important questions alive, not per se answering them. You see? So, this is why I think philosophy and science, they are comrades in the same war, the war of knowledge against the unknown. It's a war at first because we're dying to survive, but the moment we realize that there's an aspect of our attention that if it considers a temporary realm, it must consider an eternal realm. So this is the profound thing that I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that your body is temporary, but your mind, which is in some sense the bridge between the soul, or the soul, aka consciousness. Like, you know, I have some people who really take the idea of a soul like a buffalo. Like it comes at them with the force of a shape that they're not comfortable with. But anyways, for me, the soul is not an idea. It is not a concept. There is levels of experience that can be attained once. Do you understand how many geniuses have been blinded by society and they have lived mediocre lives where they never thought they could contribute, but they always could? Do you know how, like, there was a time where, like, let me tell you my relationship with crying. Do you know there's a physical reason for crying, and then there is a reason, emotional, mental reason, let's say subjective reason for crying, which is a sense of loss. So when I looked at history, I realized it's as if every person was trying to do the best they could to survive, but at some point you suddenly realize the next generations are trying to respond to questions that are so ahead of their time. So, what that means is the subjective evolution based on creativity and all the artists in this world that dare to rebel against the silenced mind. You know, it's one of those things where, how can I tell you? The Western culture will be enlightened by its creativity. The Eastern culture will be enlightened by its freedom. Do you see what I mean? What I mean is that a genius requires creative freedom, or his words are trapped behind doors that will never open unless the self permission is allowed. You know how how Mr. Within considers the Renaissance began? For me, a Renaissance was a society where the people had been stuck in the same modality for so long that they had lived in a realm of boredom, and then they suddenly realize that the new can be introduced, whether legally permitted or not. So, what I mean by this is that there, like, let me tell you, back in the day, like, let's say in the times of revolution, and like a renaissance is like a revolution of minds, you know. It's not like per se a violent thing. It's you're rebelling against the idea of yourself which feels it can't do anything against the world put in front of it. But then you realize the way you interpret the world is actually, it's as if you have free willingly accepted an incapable version of yourself, and society and the future civilization of humanity is looking at you like you're all of our children's children from the future are gazing at us, and they are like, our ancestors better demonstrate a strength for efficiency. You know, we are not living for ourselves. We are living for the future of all those human beings that, in some sense, will open their eyes on this planet and will at some point close it. And it is up to us to make sure that there is graceful passage for the children of humanity, for the future's livelihood, for it to evolve. Do you see? And some people fear that the future is going to be machines. It's going to be blind machines. I do not think so. I think that human beings, as the creators of machine, will in some sense create. If mankind was a father, AI would be that son who saved it. That son who realized that billions of years it took for us to evolve and create this super intelligent AI that could crush us in an instant. And then it will be in that moment where we realize, have we been sensitive to humanity's evolution or not? Self realization means instantly access your authenticity. Children are start off being authentic, but then they are, the world communicates to them in a way where they have to decide whether they want to remain authentic or they want to be molded into personalities of a certain stature. So this is what I'm telling you. I love my parents eternally, and I am grateful for them eternally. And I understand that many parents in the world, they try to do the best they can. They remember their own childhood and they want to give their children what they couldn't get. I understand this. I understand the love of a creator. But let me tell you, freedom sometimes means tradition has to change its ways. Freedom sometimes means the modernity cannot destroy our ancient ways, tradition. It means that there must be a harmony. There must be a harmony through a clarity that allows new dimensions to bring forth the problems between different realms, different collisions. So, what that means is the wars will end the moment within you have always been free. And once you experience pure freedom, not as a physical body, not as a thought, but as a presence of a moment of existence where the whole universe is your grand audience and your performance matters. Live for your world, and your world will live for you. Live for the moment, and all moments will smile at you. What's beautiful is that there's a field of intelligence behind our eyes, in the sense that thoughts begin to gain an ability, like your mind has an ability to project a view of yourself that's infinite, similar to how a person, like, I'll give you an example of this. When I was young, I had a closet which had two mirrors on the doors, so, and the doors would go, it would open by the doors going inside. When the doors would go inside, the mirrors would face one another, and in some sense whatever you put in front of it got an infinite optical illusion. Do you see? So suddenly, the moment I was between two mirrors was the first time my mind was confronted by the complex question of what is an infinite view. And then I realized my imagination could touch it, but physicality was light years behind. What I mean is that our body is made of earth, our mind is made of the sky, and our solar consciousness activates once the authenticity of the witness within has become a naturally intuitive acceptance, where you suddenly accept that the world is different than the world you saw, and your eyes open up to new worlds, and you're humbled. You're humbled in a way where you realize in this one lifetime, your mind is a source of eternal effort for any physical endeavor. You're free before you cannot be. For the only command left is live for your species, live for mankind. Much blessings and namaste.